I was convicted. I'm sentenced to serve 28 years in prison. I'm 17 years old, turning 18, supposed to be starting college. Instead, I was starting a 28-year sentence in a supermaximum security prison in deep in Wisconsin. It didn't become real until I heard them say guilty, because I just knew for a fact people who did not do anything wrong don't go to prison. And that's not what happened.
You're all right. Good to meet you, Jarrett.
You as well. Great to meet you.
Thanks
for having me.
No, man, listen, I have been reading your background. An incredible story, which I'm sure you're going to tell me parts about. But
thank you.
In terms of numbers, what is the size of the problem? How big of a problem is wrongful convictions?
I mean, look, the studies say that we're looking at like anywhere from 2 to 5% of convictions and people who are currently incarcerated as a good, gauge as to the issue that we have. And when you think about 2 to 5%, it doesn't sound like much until you hear, the overall number. And that overall number is we're at 2-point-something million people who are incarcerated. So, 2 to 5%, and I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician, that's a lot of damn people, right? And when you think about that number, you try to peel back the layers to try to figure out, why does that number exist? And it circles back to other numbers. And those numbers are the resources a person has to be able to get what I call A1 justice as opposed to the secondary B justice, because I believe there are two separate justice systems. There are for those who can afford to let things play out and preserve their due process, but then there are others who can afford nothing more but to save the rest of the time on their life. And usually when they do that, they're pleading guilty of the stuff that they shouldn't do, or they are resting their lives on court-appointed attorneys, and those numbers are the result of it.
What is the difference in standard between a court-appointed attorney and somebody who has the resources to appoint their own attorney?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because when it comes to me, I hope people understand when I'm saying court-appointed or public defender, it isn't a knock on the entity. It is to clarify just how hamstrung that entity is. So when someone is appointed a court-appointed attorney, they usually come from the public defender's office, and if they don't come from the public defender's office because of some conflict, they're appointed an attorney by the court. What happens is when you're a private attorney, I have my own office now. We have 3 offices: Chicago, Milwaukee, also in New York. When a client retains me, I am able to focus and hone in and put a specific team together on that case and lock in on it and spend the necessary time. When you're a court-appointed attorney or you're a public defender, you're juggling cases that make it nearly impossible for you to do your job. And that is the difference between the folks who get justice and the folks who don't, because literally 80, if not higher, percentage of the people who encounter the criminal justice system rely on public defense.
What happened in your case?
In my case, this is exactly what we're talking about. I had an attorney that was appointed to me off of a panel list. My attorney was a few years removed, really from law school and underqualified and overwhelmed to take on a case. I was accused of several counts of sexual assault that stemmed from an allegation at a party that was undermined literally hours after this allegation, because the police received a interview note from a witness who basically said that the allegation was false. They withheld that from us, and we go to trial, ended up being found guilty. And as a result, the attorney never hired an investigator, right? He never got on the ground to go speak and talk to witnesses, because if he would have done so, he would have found that the statement was given by the witness that basically undermined all of the allegations, and I never would have been convicted. But because he was a panel attorney, overwhelmed with a crazy caseload, there are no checks and balances. There's no making sure that the attorney is fit and qualified and has done this before. It's just, if it's a warm body, then it meets the constitutional standard of effective counsel, and they're done with it.
And so you were convicted?
I was convicted.
Sentenced to?
I was initially sentenced to serve 20 years in prison, but I had a lot to say at my sentencing hearing.
Okay.
And as a result, the judge told me that I wasn't remorseful, and she gave me an additional 8 years in prison. On the spot, right? So it didn't have anything to do with the allegation, or my wrongful conviction. It had more so to do with me defiantly claiming my innocence, which was ultimately proven almost 10 years later after my release.
So going through that process, you're arrested. You go through the process of being prosecuted. In the back of your mind, were you always thinking, well, I'm not going to go to jail for this. I won't be convicted. Or was there like a moment you had a moment of reality, like, oh shit, this is real?
I say this all the time. I come from a rough neighborhood in Chicago, but like we didn't go to prison and get arrested and shooting guns and all. We just weren't, man. My grandmother was a strong lady and she stayed on all of us. So my experience with the law was doom, 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 law and order, right? You never saw an episode where someone was intentionally, wrongfully convicted and they went to prison. So this entire nightmare for me going through it didn't become real until I heard them say guilty. Because I just knew for a fact, people who did not do anything wrong don't go to prison. And that's not what happened.
And so you were convicted.
I was convicted. I'm sentenced to serve 28 years in prison. I'm 17 years old, turning 18, supposed to be starting college. Instead, I was starting a 28-year sentence in a supermaximum security prison in deep in Wisconsin.
Okay, how far is that from home?
It's several hours away from home. So, I wrote a book, and in the book, I detail more about the experience and the impact that it had on my family. And there's a chapter in the book where I talked about, my mom and her and how she would have to come and see me and get on the bus, and because it was just so far away. And in the wintertime, she's racing to miss this bus. When you miss this bus, it's over with, Peter. It's no, you've missed that day to visit, right? Mm-hmm. So she's racing and rushing to get to this bus. She slips on some black ice, breaks her leg. I never forgave myself, for that day. And it was part of the fuel that drove me to get to where I am, because I felt like I needed to repay her back, so badly, right? Mm. And there were many moments like that throughout my almost 10 years of being incarcerated where there were light bulb type moments, where I realized this ain't just a Jarrett Adams thing. This is a problem that exists within our system because we haven't put forth the energy, efforts, and resources to fix it. And so it was many eye-awakening moments. And the 5-6 hours I was away from the home that I grew up in, it was not nearly as far as the way I felt being isolated in that prison. There's nothing around you but other men who are incarcerated, and some of which have been incarcerated for decades at a time before I got there. Phone calls are literally $20 the first minute and 5 cents the next minutes. Not many people in my family and friends could afford that. And it just made me realize how much of an emphasis prison places on breaking the spirit as opposed to any correction abilities that they tagline.
I thought it was cool, the Department of Correction.
Yeah, but I experienced the Department of Warehousing like a lot of other men and increasingly women in the States.
But listen, we know we can get cheap phone calls these days.
Of course,
if it's $20 for a phone call, somebody's making money off that.
I mean, listen, it goes to, why I was excited to really do this podcast, because I know that most of the listeners come from my financial background.
Yes, sir.
But what I don't believe that both the community which I come from, as well as the community that listens to this podcast, understands that this is all related to a bottom line. Prisons, that exist in small rural areas are the financial backbone of that area. And then there are a bunch of different other things that allow people to make this a business and not, any safety and security for the public and all of the other taglines, right? So the phone calls are just one thing. Then there are canteen items, right? Ridiculously overpriced items where there's a conglomerate, so to speak, because you can't order from Amazon while you're locked up. So you're ordering from that vendor. That vendor has negotiated a contract with that prison. And so there too is a business within that, right? So there's money tied directly to the issues that ail us in the States when it comes to our system.
Isn't there also, in some prisons, they essentially have workshops where they're producing items that are sold commercially outside of the prisons? And I'm sure I've heard about this before, and the wages that you get paid in the prison is considerably below minimum wage.
You get paid, so the prison that I was in, the jobs inside of there that was considered the lucrative jobs, right, paid you about 20 cents to a quarter, sometimes up to $1 an hour. And you were producing license plates. You were producing, the mocks and smocks that the state employed hospital workers wear. So essentially, not only are you in prison and you're costing taxpayers for each day that you're in prison, you're also cheap labor that doesn't benefit the taxpayers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's like slave labor.
That's exactly what it
prison.
is. Yeah. If you look at it, and then look at it this way, look at the history of where prisons and jailing people came from, and it came from literally the 13th Amendment. When you think about, okay, we can't lock people up.
Yeah, 13th Amendment. Because
13th Amendment is the amendment that discusses involuntary servitude.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what that means is you cannot enslave anyone and force them to work except ... If that person is incarcerated, then as a part of their punishment, it is an overrider to that 13th Amendment protection. Because you're incarcerated, you can work this job without us having to respect your constitutional rights that are afforded to you.
Is it compulsory, this work, or is it optional?
It's definitely not optional in some places.
Right.
There have been horrific stories out of Angola and Louisiana, where if you do not go to these jobs, you will go to segregation in some of these institutions. And so because the law allows and the Constitution allows for each state to have its own policing power, you have a gambit. There are different issues that exist in different prisons in different states. And so, there are prisons where you can't just say, "No, I don't feel like going to go and put together license plates." And then they'll come to your door with about 3 or 4 guards and say, "Well, do you feel like putting your hands through the trap so we could put these handcuffs on you and take you down to segregation?"
I interviewed a lady called Lynn Albrook a few years ago. Her son was convicted for running a website where you could buy, it's like an open, free libertarian market.
Yeah.
He got, and people were buying and selling drugs on there.
Right.
We don't need to get into the complexity of that, but he got charged with something called the Kingpin charge.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar.
Got double life sentence plus 40 years. He currently will not leave jail without a pardon.
Yeah.
She told me 2 things that really stood out to me. One thing you've already mentioned, which she said, you can be put in a jail anywhere around the country. And what that does is that tears families apart, but it also adds an economic pressure to the families to go and visit their loved ones.
Yeah.
And if they've got kids, it's highly traumatic because sometimes the kids can't go and see their father, maybe mother, because it's so far away. And so there's that. But the bigger thing she told me about that really stuck with me, I'm glad you mentioned these rural communities where the prison is the backbone. She said because of these, the Prison Guards Association, I can't remember the name of it, has a strong lobbying arm which lobbies for harsher sentences and is basically the arm that stopped the removal of harsh sentences for simple crimes like
Yes.
cannabis. And it's because if you don't lock enough people up in these towns, this could devastate the town because they're the biggest
Absolutely.
employer. But the
Yeah.
incentives are screwed.
Yes, I mean, look, it's one of these things where the business side of this has allowed us to lose our sympathy and empathy for mankind and womankind, to be politically correct in this time, because women are being increasingly locked up as well because, it's almost like they're running out of men, to lock up. So now they're turning their tricks and trades on the female population. And that is exactly the truth. Listen, and I'm locked up in a prison called Waupun, Wisconsin. And it's a max / supermax in some areas of it. When I tell you that almost every meal, there was some form of potato, right? And there was milk. All of it came from the farms that surrounded the prison. So there is a bunch of business that's tied to it. So then now you're incentivizing people to vote a certain way, even though their moral compass is telling them this isn't right. They're voting a certain way because it is the first law of nature is self-preservation. So you have people who are voting in this way because they believe, right? Because it's not the truth. They believe that their existence is tied to a prison, right? That pays them. There are other things that we can do in terms of making sure the rural areas have jobs and stuff. And that is far above my pay grade to even make so many suggestions. But one thing I can say is keeping businesses in the states, and not outsourcing is a way. But when you talk about the building of prisons, you talk about no end in sight. When you think about it, right? What's the end game, right? Whenever you're thinking about any business plan or something like that, and you're doing the numbers, you're thinking about the bottom line. What's the end game? There seems to be no end game in sight besides continue to lock people up when it comes to our views and what we're doing in our system.
So it is essentially a prison industrial complex.
That's exactly what it is without me saying that, because I know that line is catchy, but that is exactly what it is. And that's the definition of what people are talking about. I'll give you a couple of examples, right? And I wanted to, because I was going to say this and I almost forgot, but I want to make sure I make this point of the stark differences between both the beginning, right, where a person is convicted, and then the actual prisons themselves, as opposed to what we see across the pond. So I'm in my last year of law school. I went to law school at Loyola Law School down in Chicago. I'm working full-time as an investigator at the Federal Public Defender's Office, and I am going to school in a night program, but it will make me graduate in 4 years and not 3 years. So I spoke, with the administration, trying to figure out how do I do this. They're like, look, if you take these study abroads, you can make up credits in the summertime, and you'll graduate in 3 years. So I took a trip to London for the credits and walked away with something that I will never, ever forget in terms of an experience. Part of our assignment was to go to the Old Bailey, right?
Okay, yeah.
So we stayed at the Good Enough Club, just so I'm giving you landmarks and stuff like that. So we go to the Old Bailey, and we're going to the Old Bailey for a matter of days throughout the time that we stayed. We stayed for about 3 weeks, 4 weeks. When I first get there, I'm looking at this lady, and she is a barrister. And she is prosecuting a child sex case, right? And she is handing this other guy his wig, so to speak, right?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? She is giving it to him. I come back a couple days later, and I see her. She's now defending a child sex case, and she is doing it just as vigorously and as smart as a whip as you can. And I realized for the first time that the system is set up in England so that barristers represent both the state and defendants in certain cases. And you know what that does? That forces the system to keep the sympathy and empathy and not become jaded. Not everyone looks like a nail that you need to hammer now, right? Because now you understand from different sides and you understand mitigating factors. It gives you a intimacy with issues that are social and economically that cause a lot of these crimes and people, committing crimes. And it makes you a better person and you have a better system. The second thing, you look at what they're doing in different countries in terms of how they lock people up. They believe in what they say when they say, We are incarcerating you with the hopes that you pay your debt to society and come home a better person, and know what you do, right? So they treat you differently. They don't lock you up on top of each other, or you're locked up in some southern states. If you look down at Alabama and their prison systems, there are people where the capacity of a room is only supposed to be 20. There are 50 cots laying out on the floor. There are people who are in 2-man cells with 3 people in. And when you look at those makeups and you see to that, you say to yourself, we're out in California, right, in LA. You couldn't keep animals locked up the same way that you keep human beings in the states locked up. And we do this to people, and essentially we treat them like animals in animal-like conditions, and we release them and we tell them, now you go be human, right? When what we should be doing is following the model that's going on in Germany and different places where they're treating people like individuals that will be released into the community. So instead of them being locked and carried away to their cells and back and forth, they're giving them keys. They're teaching them responsibility. They're giving them financial literacy. They're making an emphasis on therapy while they're there before they get out, because I know, like a lot of other people will tell you, if you try to give me reentry services on my way out the door after 10 years or years of looking at nothing but impactful things that damages a person's mental health care, well, that's just like you giving me a parachute and I'm about to jump out the plane. Don't you think I need to have that parachute on and have practice how to jump before you give it to me? So our system, just if you think about it in those aspects, we don't have a system that's designed to do anything but what it's been doing, because that's how it's been designed, to segregate, separate, and continue to keep a chokehold on certain communities that look like mines of color.
Yeah, the conspiracy theorist in me says they want you back.
I mean, think about this.
We'll see you back soon.
Let's say this. So we're talking numbers, right?
Well, let me ask you one question before that. Here in the US, how many prisons are run privately by private companies, and how many are run, say, by the state?
So there's a if I had to like, throw at the wall a percentage, I would say this. There's roughly about maybe 10-15% of privately owned prisons amongst all of them, right? And there's a difference as well in the conditions. These privately ran prisons are extremely violent, and the deaths compared to state-ran prisons are off the charts. And the reason why is because of this. You're thinking about that bottom line again when you have a private prison, right? So I'm not thinking about staffing this prison to make sure that everyone is safe and accounted for. I'm thinking about staffing this prison to
Profit.
Exactly. That's it. So we have and there's absolutely no need. The prison system is not the school system. There's no need to have private prisons like you have private schools. They don't offer anything better. The conditions are worse.
Yeah, I was just looking here in the UK. The UK does have private prisons. They're part of a mixed system where both publicly and privately run institutions exist. They were first introduced in the UK in the early 1990s, parts of an effort to reform the prison system and reduce costs. There you go, reduce costs.
That's it.
Several private prisons operated by Serco, G4S, and Sodexo, blah, blah, blah. The involvement of private companies in running prisons has been subject to debate. Supporters argue that leads to cost savings and innovation, while critics claim that it can create incentives to cut corners and that the profit motive is incompatible with the goals of rehabilitation and justice. Yeah, incompatible.
That's it. I mean, if you're really talking about putting a dent in this thing, that is our system. We need to bridge the gap between social and mental health care and our criminal justice system. Our system is just, you're dealing with a lot of people who have mental illness, undiagnosed, what I like to call not post-traumatic stress, but persistent traumatic stress. Because if the neighborhoods that you're living in are ravaged with gun violence, there's no way that doesn't affect you in who you are as a person. And so those are mitigating factors that we just seem to ignore, and we've been largely ignoring it because of the criminal justice system's hammer has been felt in the Black and brown community more than it's been felt in any other community.
Well, that reminds me of something I was reading. Was it Terrence Richardson?
Yes.
Where he said he accepted a plea deal because he didn't want to face an all-white jury in the South.
Yes. And Terrence Richardson and Ferron Claiborne is a case that I am working on through my nonprofit, Life After Justice. Life After Justice is a nonprofit. We identify certain cases to argue that what we learn from the wrongful conviction should be implemented on the onset to prevent them. Along with our emphasis on mental health care, as well as just making sure that we are allowing people the tactics they need to reintegrate. So that case that we've been working on has been for 10 years now. And, you know, when I got to know Terrence Richardson and his family, along with Ferron Claiborne, you know, I had to go down to the town of Waverly, Virginia, and I had to speak with the people down there as well to get to know him and the case. And sure enough, they were faced with being wrongfully convicted. But the difference was this: if they were wrongfully convicted, then they would be put to death. I had 10 years to reverse my conviction and prove my innocence. If they would have been convicted of the capital murder of a police officer, they would have been put to death and there would be no appeals. So they had to decide. Even though I know we didn't do this, the state is offering us some deals that they've never offered black men accused of killing a white officer. So they took these deals thinking that the case would be over. Little did they know that the federal, authorities were looking at them, building a case on them on a false drug allegation just to retry them for the murder again. But get this, they go to trial, they're found not guilty.
This is the thing I didn't understand.
Still sentenced to life.
How can you be found not guilty and sent to jail?
And so I'll try to explain.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it does. It's not going to even make sense when I try to explain this in a legal concept. So, in a federal practice, in federal criminal law, the federal law gives the feds a different sovereignty, right? So you have state law, you have federal law. And so there's a case that needs to be taken down called U.S. versus Watts. And it says that if a person is tried in federal court, even if they're found not guilty of most of what they're charged with, if they're found guilty of one offense, which is they found Terrence Richardson and Ferron Claiborne guilty of a drug count, one single drug count that would have got them around 10 years in prison. So it says that if you're convicted of one count, the prosecution can argue that your sentence be enhanced to life despite the jury finding you not guilty under something called relevant conduct. It then becomes the judge's discretion to decide whether or not the judge will enhance your sentence to life. And in the case of black and brown men, they almost always enhance their sentence based on relevant conduct. And so what I said to you does not make sense.
Doesn't make any
because it
sense.
shouldn't make sense.
It's crazy.
Because it is the robbing of due process when a jury has been paneled, a jury has heard the evidence, and a jury has found the person not guilty, yet they're still sentenced to life, which is why Life After Justice has been behind this case, and we will not get off until there's a resolution.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
How much bias exists within a jury where it's a white jury and it's a black person that they are deciding on, and every other scenario, a black jury and a black person, or a white jury and a white person? Like, how much is there a flat bias across it all?
So I think this is the context that I'll frame this response on. When you look at the historical depiction of black and brown men, it has always been that of aggressive, savage, you name it, right? When you look at the news depiction, when you look at the historical connotations that are attributed to black and brown men and just everything, you could think of as I should be scared of this certain type of folk and how it looks, right? That too spills into the jury pool because the jury pool is made up of who? They're made up of listeners, of watchers, of people who look at the news, people who read news articles. So historically, we've tainted jury pools in our society through the depiction of others that come across the news in different publications. So when you look at that, you're now looking at a panel jury, right? Let's say it's an all-white jury. My case involved an all-white jury. And they're looking at me, and where they would give you the benefit of a doubt as a white man, and it's no, offense to you, or I don't, or no attack on you at all. They would give you that benefit of the doubt because they have more relateness to you and how you grew up and putting themselves in situations like you than they would for a black or brown person. They would tend to want to say to themselves, well, I don't know how it is growing up over there or what it's like over there. All they can relate to is what they know and what they've been raised on. So that is the answer, which drives a lot of the reason why you have to have diverse jury pools in order to have just results, period.
So, and is that achievable?
Yes.
So why doesn't it happen?
Because again, you have these loopholes, these Batson challenges and stuff like that. Batson is a Supreme Court case which dealt with striking jurors of color or female jurors or any reason that someone would strike a juror for a reason that has nothing to do with them being qualified to decide on a case. So what ends up happening is this. Let's say in my case, right? So they panel 20 jurors, right? Prospective jurors. And then you go through and you do voir dire. Voir dire is when you go through, you ask questions about the juror and you make a selection. Each side gets about 2 or 3 that they can just disqualify the person just because they didn't like their answers, right? But then, you can move to disqualify someone based on whatever it is that they said. There are a lot of cases where the prosecution, and it happened in my case, so I use my case. The prosecution in my case removed every person of color or any minority.
Because they knew that would give a better chance of conviction.
That's it.
It's a weird one because it sometimes feels like their goal is to win more than it is to get a rightful answer.
It goes back to the point that I made about the barristers in London, in our system here. There's a system set up in London where they preserve that sympathy and empathy. Prosecutors in the States are the queen on the chessboard. They are the most powerful piece that can float anywhere, take pieces. They can actually sacrifice themselves and become another queen if they want down the road. That is how powerful they are. And they are also, in my opinion, in need of a shot of sympathy and empathy at all times, because you see some of the most horrific crimes and you're prosecuting some of the most horrific crimes over and over again. That jades you. That makes you believe that every person accused is just like the person who actually did it that you prosecuted this time or that time. And so we have a system that is set up again where the prosecution is the hammer and everyone looks like a nail.
It feels like for jury selection, it should be blind Q&As.
It should. And not only that, not only should it be blind Q&As, they shouldn't even know the race of the person, being tried and who's being accused.
So no names as well?
It has nothing to do with it at all, right? And in my case specifically, I was referred to as the black man so many times in my case that I thought that was my name by the end of it, right? But literally, when I'm 17 years old, I'm being called boy in the police station. Suddenly I become a man in front of the jury because that man, black man, has that negative connotation that drags along those historical depictions that I talked about.
It makes me think of, you know your football more than I do, but my understanding is that you, historically here in the US, there was a low number of black coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And they changed the rules so you had to interview black coaches alongside white coaches.
That's correct.
They didn't force them to
Yeah.
select them, but just that change shifted the number of coaches that became black.
Exactly.
It got rid of that kind of like, maybe it's a subconscious bias or that. It feels like if you want a fair justice system, you have to be able to nudge it in a similar direction.
Absolutely. There's no doubt that there's truth to what you're saying. And we always seem to take one step forward, two steps back. And I guess the best example is the war on drugs, right? So I'm incarcerated 1998. I'm released in February of 2007, right? And what I experienced, yes, I spent almost 10 years wrongfully convicted until the Innocence Project was able to work to get my conviction reversed, and I came home. I was a part of the prison boom that happened. That boom didn't just happen, right? That boom was the result of the war on drugs, and the war on drugs was essentially the war on the black and brown community who was besieged by the drugs, right? And so when you think about that, you think about that is the rise of the numbers that became ridiculous, right? Whether you almost locked up almost 1 million black men, and of the 2-point-something million are locked up right now, black men predominate the number of people who are incarcerated. And when you peel back the layers on that, a lot of it has to do with drugs, right? So to your point, they've now started to do different things in terms of passing laws that are supposed to, right? Provide a relief mechanism to those who were incarcerated to ridiculous sentences as a result of drugs. But again, it's taking baby steps. And so the people who are supposed to get that relief are not necessarily getting it. But to your point, if we wanted to change the numbers of the huge disproportionate effect on black and brown people, we would change the way we prosecute crimes in the areas in which we prosecute them. And that has to be encouraged by both the state and the feds, but it has to be done by the states.
Right. Okay. Talk to me about the work that you do then. How are you different from the Innocence Project? Because it's the Innocence Project who helped you out, and everybody's
Yes.
aware of them. They've obviously done some incredible work.
Yeah.
How does your work differ?
So part of what we do and how we differ is this. First of all, we partner with the Innocence Projects all across the country, including, the Innocence Network, right? So it's not like we're different, but we are doing things that are different, right? And what we do is this. We specifically take on cases like Terrence and Farron because we're trying to tackle the issues that we see are low-hanging fruit. For example, like incentivized witnesses. For those who are listening, incentivized witness is this. There is nothing else to the case besides the witness who says, hey, Peter told me he killed that guy, and, we was in a cell and he told me everything, right? And what that guy is getting is he's getting time off of his prison sentence, or he's getting moved and housed in a cushy prison because he's there for the rest of his life, so at least he goes somewhere where he's cushy. That is what you call an incentivized witness. And what we're doing in our state's system is we're allowing evidence like that to go to a jury without educating the jury on just how inaccurate that is. There have been a number of cases that I've just explained in that one, incentivized witness, where DNA has come behind and definitively proven that a person had nothing to do with the crime. So the jailhouse person that you just put up in front of the jury and he said that he told them everything and stuff like that, it wasn't true. So it is a result of these type of tactics that is obtaining wrongful convictions. And so we're taking cases like Terrence and Farron, and we are litigating the case while as well as doing a national survey to find out how many cases exist like Terrence and Farron, so we can use that data to support a national change. Because what we found is this. If someone asks me how many murders were committed in Los Angeles last year, I can literally Google and find it. If I ask you how many people were convicted falsely off of a witness who was promised something to get out, you can't find those numbers anywhere. And the reason why is because they don't want you to have the numbers to show something's wrong with this. So what we're doing at Life After Justice is we're taking data to drive what we are doing in our work. And so we're taking smaller amounts of cases in order to prove that point and do what we need to do in terms of the data. Along with that, right, We are also increasing efforts to incentivize everyone to play their part in providing mental health care and reintegration needs to people who suffer the car crash that is our system, right? So we are placing a huge emphasis on that. And in everything else, the third bucket is the policies that we plan to put in place as a result of the numbers and the data that we learn. But that's what it is. And that's what I told you. My excitement about this podcast was this. We have more in common with what we're doing than you think. Numbers drive business. Numbers tell you whether or not a business is going to be successful. The numbers that we are looking for will help us provide solutions. But the numbers that we already have tell us that we're doing this god-awfully wrong.
Well, this is at a time where the military-industrial complex is taking up a huge amount of taxpayers' money.
Yes.
The big pharma industrial complex is at a point where, and I see a complete parallel there.
Yeah, they don't go to jail, do they? Big pharma.
No, they should do.
Yeah.
But there's a comparable there in that people want to prescribe a pill for something that's wrong.
Yes.
Rather than talk about preventative care.
That's
and
it.
it feels like overturning wrongful convictions is great, but if you could do preventative work so the wrongful conviction didn't happen in the first place, you're not going to put somebody through the system. You're not going to spend that cost in it. You're not going to have the downstream effects of that person's family.
Yeah.
And it's going to have a net benefit to the taxpayers and the economy.
To everyone.
Everyone.
And that's the point that we're doing with Life After Justice. So that's the difference between us in the Innocence world and the Innocence Network. The
preventative stuff.
The preventative. We have to let the data drive us to the answers and the solution. Because look, we allow science in the study of numbers, in the study of cases, to get us out of something that this entire world faced, and that was the pandemic and the coronavirus, right? We need to be allowing that same type of research effort to prevent wrongful convictions, as well as, over sentencing and a number of different issues that plague our system. And so now that we pretty much know what we need, we have to ask ourselves, why isn't it being done?
Well, let's talk about the numbers. But I think in my head, I'm actually seeing it's two issues. There is the wrongful convictions. Then there's the unnecessary sentencing.
Yes.
There's probably people who are being sentenced and convicted and go into prison who probably don't need to be incarcerated, depending on the crime. And in doing that, you are creating a record that makes it difficult for them to integrate into society. If we had a more rounded thinking, empathetic system that rightfully dealt with the worst people in society in the right way, but also had an empathetic side to why maybe some people for minor offences are up in jail, could create a system which has a less of a tax burden on society and also is less destructive to families.
I mean, think about the example that you gave me, which the lady who was on and her son, right? So he didn't take a gun and shoot anyone. He didn't burn the house down full of kids. Why can't his life lesson be, we're sentencing you to a time in which you teach people legally how to do business and tell your story to other kids about the lessons that they can learn from where your life is right now. Why do we blow out the candle on his life instead of trying to keep it lit to ignite passion, motivation in business and creating things for a positive?
What would the costs be to keeping him in jail approximately per year?
I mean, you think about it like this. We're spending a bed amount, right? So it varies, right? So they calculate it by the bed. And the bed and the day that you're there is roughly around $30 or something like that, right? To taxpayers. So now you calculate that to 2-point-something million people who are incarcerated, right? We're talking about astronomical millions, right? With billions is really what we're spending on our incarceral system.
Okay, I'm going to do the math on this.
It's
so if we say it's 2.4 million times 365 days a year times 20. I mean, it breaks the calculator to begin with. Look at it. But what is that? That is 17.5 billion, I think.
Billion.
Yeah.
And when you look at the pie chart, there's a DOJ pie chart that comes out every year. And it talks about how much we're spending as a country on, corrections. That's what they call it, corrections, right? We're spending billions and billions of dollars each year. And we're spending billions and billions of dollars with no bottom line and no end in sight. And we're able to get this done by continuing to conjure up people's fears, which allow them to have a blanket of I don't care about it as long as the government tells me I'm safe or something like that, right? I don't need to look under the hood. But it's starting to spill over, and it has been spilling over into our communities. 90-something% of the people who are incarcerated, they will get out one day. Wouldn't me and you be a better neighborhood and society if the people who were getting out, reintegrating, were in better conditions to do that?
Yeah, it says here 80 billion a year, the US system.
I mean, come on.
Yeah. I don't have the details on me now, but I know the Norwegian system has been very good at reducing reoffending rates.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if you followed the Norwegian.
I do. And that was the example that I was giving you.
They've been trying it in Texas as well.
Listen, they are trying, but they're not trying as hard as they're trying in terms of locking people up, is what I'm saying. And everyone has to be doing it together because, again, for the most part, the issues with corrections is going to start and end in the states, right? And that's why these individual states have so much power with it. But again, our federal government can encourage better practices from the states on how they're doing corrections, right? They can most certainly do it. They can incentivize states with different grants and packages to study their issues and their systems to find answers and solutions. That's part of what we're doing. Like, we are literally going out to fundraise to help us with this national survey, right? And trust me, we'll take coins, bitcoins, dollars, or pennies because we believe the answers lie with this data. And so we're going around collecting this data to prove a point. But the federal government can incentivize the states individually to do this research because, again, they have numbers on how many people are raped, robbed, and killed every year, almost every quarter. Why aren't we keeping data on the numbers of wrongful convictions and those causes that are leading to them so we can implement the change to stop them from happening, which will then lead us to other ideas that can be driven by data to get us to a better system?
Well, I've been coming to the US a lot for the last 20 years, probably 100 times I've come here. I love it over here.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of problems. And every time I see a problem like this, because I know the way the US systems work and the lobbyists, I'm like, who's making the money? Who's making the money is incentivized to not change this?
Yes.
Because somebody must be.
Well, look, you look at the private prisons, but not only looking at the private prisons, look at the businesses that are around that invest in them. You have some towns, companies, and all of that invest their 401ks right into the prison system, right?
That's nuts.
And when you think about that, right, who do you think they're voting for, or what policies do you think they're voting for? There is a bottom line that is tied to all of the barriers that we face when it comes to changes in our system and making it a better place. There's this. We know who isn't making the money, right? And it's the people who are being hammered by the system. So then you just have to start looking around, right, and asking yourself, how on earth did we ever approve a phone company that can charge someone $20 a minute for the first minute and 5 cents? Where did that approval come? How did we ever approve that there can only be 1 or 2 vendors for a prison that houses thousands of inmates and they have to buy from this or they can't buy? Like, they stopped at one point. At one point, when I was incarcerated, especially during the holidays, your family could send you a package of, the assortment of cheeses. I was going to say charcuterie board, but I always butcher that, right? I don't even know.
Right.
I got it? Charcuterie?
Yeah.
Okay,
well,
so...
Charcuterie,
right?
Charcuterie. That's what the French would say.
Right. So there was a time during the holidays where you can get these meats and cheeses and stuff like that in. And to be honest with you, in a place as dark as that, it provided a glimmer of light and hope in a dark place like that. When you got that box from your family with the cheeses and the mustards and the spreads, and they stopped it, right? It wasn't stopped because of a security concern, because the security issue that was nullified was your family can't send it from their house. It has to be purchased online and it comes in from the company. So, a company isn't putting any contraband or anything like that. They want to do business.
Yeah.
They stopped it. Did not provide a reason why. But let me tell you what the reason was.
I know what you're going to tell me.
Right? Because during that time, people stopped buying stuff from where?
From the vendors.
That's it. And so the vendors started to sell the same items that used to come in from, the companies like Pepperidge Farm and all that type of stuff in the boxes, extras. They started to sell those very items and kept all of the money. You used to be able to order shoes off of a company called East Bay, right? And then they stopped. And what they said was, people were fighting over shoes and some couldn't get them, some could. It was causing issues. But you could buy these shoes off a Canteen. It just makes no sense other than the sense that we know it's making. Bottom line.
So you're earning 20 cents an hour to go and buy things that are overpriced. I mean, a bag of chips in there would literally be priced at least 40% more. Like back in 2000, early 2000s, they weren't a quarter anymore, but you could find a bag of chips for 50 cents, right? I mean, we're paying $1 for bags of chips that are there, right? And do you think when we got those airbags of chips, do you think it was an attendant we can go to at the store to say, hey, man, this bag of chips was defective. I need a no, you got what you got. And another point to that is nothing on there is really healthy, right? Of course not.
So it's like it's
like
just
in the hospitals.
I mean, it's crazy. Like I said, I just you look at it and it goes to your point that you were making. Somebody's profiting very well off of this, and their profit is such that change is hard to come by.
When you were sentenced 28 years, was there any chance of parole?
My parole was in February of 2021 or something like that, right? And the reason why is because...
How many years into the sentence would that be?
That would have been 20 years into the sentence.
20 years, okay.
Yeah, 20 years into the sentence.
Yeah, so you could have still been in now.
I literally could have still been in there. I literally could be not where I am right now. Married, just had a 6-month-old. So, I'm waking up every morning looking at her and just, sometimes I do glare off into the distance and look and think about what my life could have been. And I also think about this. If Jarrett Adams is still serving that maximum security, sentence up to 28 years, well, Jarrett Adams isn't, a graduate of law school. He's not representing Terrence and Farron. He's not founding an organization, Life After Justice, to help people reintegrate. My impact is being felt in the community, right? And so it goes to show you that the incentive that we should all have, listeners, viewers, society in general, is that you never know when efforts being made are going to produce someone to come into the community and help, like I have.
So I am back in England. I own a football team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love the games. On a Saturday, I absolutely love it. When the Saturday's over, I'm thinking it's another week to a game. It sucks, right?
Yeah.
All week I'm thinking about the game. That's 1 week.
Yeah.
How do you even process the idea of 28 years? Knowing that you're, 17, so that would mean you'd be coming out at 27,
40,
45
or something
45,
like that.
42, yeah.
So
how do you process that?
I had help, with this. And so when one of the most difficult things that I had to do was write this book. And the reason why is because it made me reflect on all of what I went through and how I was able to get through it. So when going back and forth and doing the book, it turned out that it wasn't about a wrongful conviction. It was about my family's support, the impact on my family, and also the community. And it talked about numbers, just like we're talking about, of other Black and brown men who are going through it in families. I get to a chapter in there where I talk about my aunt, and my aunt, everyone called her Sugar, right? And it goes because she just was so sweet, man. She'd give you the shirt off her back. What she would do is she would send me different publications, constantly having me read, whether it be the newspaper, Ebony Jet magazine, Essence magazine, just a bunch of magazines. And I started to look at the price on there because now, look, this is going from 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. This is a lot of money, right, over the years. So I told her, I said, look, I appreciate it, but you don't have to do this anymore. This stuff is costing way too much, and you don't have to do it. And she just was like, no, I'm not doing it just to do it. I'm doing it because we have acknowledged that you're physically confined behind those bars, but we refuse to let your mind ever be incarcerated.
Okay.
And so as a result of it, she was providing me with my own source of therapy in that she wanted to make sure that I lived each and every next day, that I lived each and every day prepared to come home the next day. And how could you do that if you weren't up on the relevant times and what was going on in the world? So that was her strategy with me, right?
Okay.
I had another aunt, Aunt Honey.
Sugar and honey.
Sugar and honey.
Sugar and honey.
And then look, people are gonna laugh, but my mom's name is Peaches, right? So
Peaches, sugar and honey.
Yeah, people from the States and definitely south side of Chicago. My family came from down south, and down south they give everybody nicknames, and that was their nicknames. And so my Aunt Honey would send me Bible verses, every other day, and she would just pick out these different verses. She was telling me about the story of Job and how he was falsely incarcerated and how he, maintained and continued to keep his strength. And what I really learned through that journey was this: faith is not something you can grab, touch, or taste, but you got to have it, right? It can get you through a wrongful conviction and 10 years of a sentence that I shouldn't have had, or it can get you through a business opportunity that just didn't work out, right? And I think everybody can relate to that when it comes to faith. It tested my faith. I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that I knew it was going to work out, because when I first got there, I didn't. I stopped taking phone calls. I stopped writing letters, because while I'm, going out ducking knives and trying not to get stabbed and beat up and all the things that exist in prison, my friends were making their first semester at college, the college I was supposed to go to. They're getting their first credit card, maxing out their first credit card. Like, right, all the stuff you do in life learning lessons, I was robbed of it. And so part of my existence and the reason the organization is called Life After Justice is because I wanted each and every last breath I gasp until the last one to be meant for my life and what I did after justice.
I mean, you're going in as a 17-year-old as well. That's pretty young.
Pretty young.
Did you have anyone look out for you to begin with?
I did, but I kind of morphed into first of all, I was one of the youngest looking people when I got to the prison, because at that time, I told you the prison boom happened. How did the boom happen and who did they use the boom with? They used it with young black and brown men, is how they increased the numbers of people who were incarcerated through the war on drugs. So when I got there, I was one of the youngest people. So not only was I one of the youngest people, but, they test you going into the prison. So when I did the little, standard test, they called me down to the counselor's office and they was like, yeah, your job is going to be a tutor. And I was like, well, what if I don't want to be a tutor? And they was like, well, do you want to go to segregation? Kind of like what I told you earlier, right? Well, I was like, well, I kind of want to be a tutor then, if you put it that way, right? So I'm tutoring men. And as a result of tutoring men who were required through the court's order to get their GEDs or high school equivalency degrees, I'm getting to know them and I'm getting to understand that this isn't an isolated incident. I started to go from being the tutor that I created my own job security. You needed me to not be beat up or attacked because how was you going to get tutored to pass this GED in order to get parole, right? So I morphed from that to becoming sort of a jailhouse lawyer, where I started to help guys that I realized were pleading guilty to crimes that they didn't commit in order to get out of the county on parole and then end up getting a domestic violence. Now they're in prison for 10 years off of the case that they never should have pled guilty to. So I was helping them to give time back. And when I was doing that, I was getting to know them and I was getting to understand that we have to get this survey done because there are voices in the community that provide us the answers to change the numbers that plague our system. And so I just will never forget, it isn't an act of violence that I remember that affected me the most. It was the people that I realized were not the slogans and the headlines that they make us believe, and that we should just turn our back and throw away folks to the system.
Yeah, because they do humanize, right?
That's it. If we make you believe that the person walking across your screen is a bad guy, you don't ask, what did they accuse him of? You ask, what did they do? That goes to science. That goes to everything we've learned and have to be deprogrammed from. And the only way you do that is by allowing mitigating factors to be introduced and getting to know the person past the headline and the slogan.
Very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
Keith Finley.
Man, brought a smile to my face, right? Keith Finley was the director of the Wisconsin Innocence Project. Wrote him a letter in 2003. They agreed to take my case. They litigated my case all the way up to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, and the court unanimously reversed my conviction based on the statement from the witness that was withheld from the police and not found by my attorney. I get out.
Hold on, do you find out by phone call or were you in the room?
I was just going to tell you too, I get out, but how I got out was not conventional, okay? So at the time that my case is making its way up through the courts, I'm in a place called Boscobel, Wisconsin. It's a supermax is what it is. They end up putting me in segregation because I went from the jailhouse lawyer helping people to give time back on their sentence to starting to sue the Department of Corrections for their handbook manuals and taking programs out.
Oh, so they punish you.
So yeah, they all of a sudden they gotta incentivize.
Hold on. Because you were suing them because they were taking
programs out.
The programs they were taking out were ones that would help
people get back and not come back.
Fuck these people.
You understand what I'm saying? Like the programs that we were doing was programs like this. What I started to notice was, and again, this goes back to why the nonprofit is focused on surveys and numbers.
Yeah.
Because as I'm helping people with their GEDs and all of that, I'm starting to take account, right, of how people are coming back on violations of paroles. Almost all of them were domestic phone calls where somebody's into it with their spouse. So one of the programs that I loved that I was a part of teaching the curriculum it was a program that was designed to help inmates deal with their spouses and interactions with children after years of being gone. Because, I mean, think about it, right? Your child is being raised by mom and family. You come back, the child is now, you talked about having a 14-year-old. Imagine not being in a 14-year-old's life and you come back and try to implement rules, right? Yeah. It's not going to work like that. Nope. But you got to understand, you can't lash out, curse, holler, and throw things like you would do in prison. You need to talk things out, have a conversation. And so that program was giving people, like a bird's eye view into how to handle situations when they get home. That program, in my opinion, helped people not have domestic situations, which cause violations, which caused them to go back to prison. They took it out. So I started suing them through different mechanisms, through habeas petitions and all of that. And where I'm in my cell doing these lawsuits, they have to spend money of the state to defend them. So all of a sudden, I'm taking them out of my cell at 4 a.m. in the morning. And I'm asking them, why am I being taken out? And they said that they got a confidential informant that said that I was a part of a group that wanted to take over the prison. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, do y'all see me with these glasses on? Do it look like I'm gonna take over a damn prison? Like, what are y'all talking about, right? But that wasn't it. And then what I ended up doing was I get to the prison and I litigate my way out. They reversed it and they had to pay me all the back pay from the job that I had, right?
Nice.
In order to do it. But back to your question, I found out that that my conviction was reversed in that supermax. And what they did was they didn't allow me to go down to the arguments and hear, the arguments and stuff like that. So they escorted me out of my cell. I get on the phone and I listen to the arguments. About 90 days after that, right? And right after I had won my case to be sent out of the supermax back to general population, they bring me down to the the legal call, and Man. They take me out. They bring me down to the room, and I get on the phone, and I'm hearing Keith Finley and the law students talk, and they don't know I got on the phone. And I'm saying to myself, man, they sure are in a goddamn jovial moment, for me to be locked up, and they giving me some bad news. So I'm like, what's going on? So they're like, oh, he's on. And like, man, you unanimously won. And the court said that the prison and the prosecutors have to either release or retry you within 120 days. So I learned that I was coming home in a super maximum prison that I shouldn't have been in. And I make my way down to general population. I am offered, right? These god-awful people offered me time served if I would admit to a misdemeanor offense. They would let me out. And literally what they were trying to do was duck liability and absolve themselves from any wrongdoing and stain me for the rest of my life as a sex offender, is what they were doing. I had an outstanding public defender that wasn't a public defender. He was assigned to my case. He was a guy who had retired to take care of his wife who was battling cancer. He saw my case, saw the Innocence Project was involved, took my case. We became proactive. We did a polygraph. We did a bunch of stuff. And he said, man, there's no way in the world we're pleading guilty. We make it to court. They unanimously dismiss the case. Record is expunged. And I turn around to this lady standing behind me, and she's in tears with these wrinkles and these creases of anguish, just these wrinkles, these deep wrinkles and creases of anguish I never forget. And I told her we were done crying. We were going to get our leg back. And that was my mother. And from that point on, I came home, placed the focus on therapy. I graduated from the school I was supposed to be starting when I was falsely accused and arrested when I was 18. Graduated from community college, my 4-year degree after that, because I didn't have any money when I got out. I was never compensated a dime for this.
Why not?
Because the court ruled that my attorney was ineffective, so therefore it was his negligence. When I went after him, he didn't have any malpractice insurance, and he was now doing mediations because of how bad he did my case. So I literally would have got a judgment on something that wasn't able to pay.
So when your mum was there, you turn around to your mum. Are you released immediately, or do you have to go back in?
I'm literally released immediately, so fast, right, that I don't have clothes. So I leave in this canteen purchased, jogging suit. And then it was some state-issued boots that they sent me down from the prison down to the county jail because they didn't know, to them, especially this one guy that I won't describe because my daughter might listen to this one day. This one pleasant gentleman told me on my way out, remember your number because you'll be back, right? So they sent me out and I had these state-issued boots. Once the case was dismissed and I had a couple dollars left on my canteen, do you know they charged me for the damn state-issued boots? So they charged me
Why
for the boots.
Why am I not surprised?
Right? And so I come home and I got about, a $47 check. My mom's house, she's now a senior citizen with my stepfather. And I'm mad though. So that anger was used as fuel to drive me through all of what I went through to get to where I am today. It was a major focus and emphasis placed on the mental health care piece of it because I really, I liken mental health care to the race of life or any race in general. I mean, you're not running a race without making sure that the most important piece of equipment is on your feet, and those are shoes, and they're tied. When you get back off of a wrongful conviction, especially a wrongful conviction because the pains are different, you're running a marathon to put your life back together. And in order to run that marathon, you have to have mental health care to take away, all of what you went through when you went to this prison system. And so I was able to get through and go through and eventually made my way all the way up to overturning the conviction with the same guy who got me out 10 years to the month that I got out. And that was Keith Finley.
Do you see much of him?
I do. I see much of him, but he's now we're on the board of the Center for Integrity and for Forensic Science. It's a organization that again does data on wrongful science, on science that leads to wrongful conviction. So we're on the board. We see each other, through Zoom and talk. He's spending time now in retirement with his grandbaby, and so he's cheering me on constantly because he just says it's an example to him of what we're throwing away. And he said it best when he said that.
I mean, from the limited I know from research and we've spoken, the amount of things that need to be done seem overwhelming.
Yeah.
The volume of cases are overwhelming. I mean, how do you even select cases?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. We select them with, again, when we, in selecting Terrence and Farron, and realizing that the only thing that supported their conviction was this guy who ducked a 10-year federal sentence, we said, look, that's something that we want to explore because we need to do something with that in our system. How many others are convicted based on that nonsense, right? And so that's how we select our cases at the nonprofit. We select them based on, okay, if we take this case and it results in a wrongful conviction, we refuse to stop at the pizza party or the clapping and it's over with, he's out. We want to take that on to make sure that we go all the way up as far as we can to implement laws, strategies, and policies to make sure that doesn't happen again. That doesn't happen without data and without numbers and without arguing points of cases. And that also doesn't happen if we take on a bunch of cases at one time. And there's also this. Because we're in our infancy of doing this work, I mean, we just don't have as much resources as we need. We're getting there because the more and more I talk and people hear me, even people who've read my story are like, man, I just didn't know what to expect because, again, what are those negative connotations that I tell you about? Because people often tell me like, man, I'm talking to you and I don't ever sound like you spent a day in prison. Well, how did the depictions of us in going to prison, how did they say I was supposed to act? Was I supposed to have a tattoo teardrop on my neck and eye or something like that? So
I look more criminal than you.
Yeah, I mean, like, so it's like, it's stuff like that. So I think that, again, I think what we're doing is groundbreaking. And I think that the further we go with it, and we're inviting all people to come and help us.
How do you fund it all?
I mean, look, we are doing it really spit and glue right now. We've gotten funding from some folks. More people are starting to hear what we're doing, so they're donating, right? Like, again, I go on podcasts, I talk, and man, you'd be surprised if every listener donated $1, man, that's like what? Like, you don't know. Like, you might get $100,000 based off of people saying, you know what, this year, when I decide to give, I'm going to send my friends Jarrett Adams and them across the pond a couple dollars and tell them they got friends over in the UK who are thinking about them and their struggles. We get people that are listening who come from the therapy world, the mental health care world. We get people that we're trying to recruit right now financially because that's another wing that we need to open up in Life After Justice is this. Some of the people that we are working with have been compensated millions of dollars. I and my law firm have represented men that we've been able to obtain thousands and millions of dollars in judgments. But man, how do you expect someone who's never been in charge of a piggy bank, who's been incarcerated for the most impactful years of their life, how do you get them to understand managing money in a short period of time? So as we're taking on this survey and we're learning the needs of this population, we're also partnering with people and welcoming people to come. Like, teach us what business is in a capsule so we can teach them.
Are there risks sometimes that maybe an Innocence Project or yourselves will end up taking a case and the person maybe appears to be wrongfully convicted, but they did commit the crime?
I listen, I put it in a book because I wanted people to understand that in full transparency, this work is not easy.
Yeah. It's like, how do you select?
Yes.
Is it a judgment?
There's a vetting process, right? So, in the law department, our law department is being ran by a fabulous legal director, Charlotte Whitmore. So there's a process that we have, right? Where when someone says, hey, look, I'm wrongfully convicted, they send it in, we review all the paperwork, we do all of our due diligence, we talk to former attorneys. That's why it takes so long as well, and so many resources are required. I've literally talked to everyone who's associated with Terrence Richardson and Ferran's case, right? Because you need to have that sense of security in going out and placing your name on something. So we have a high vetting process. And let's just be honest, right? If you can't convince me, I can't convince others.
Fair. One of the things that I couldn't help but think about through all of this was there is no moral case for the death penalty in a system that has a percentage of people which are likely wrongful convictions.
None. And we know, look, if the system has acknowledged that wrongful convictions exist to the tune of, there's now documented like almost 3,000 of us, but I say that number is small because I don't know where they're documenting this from because they're not getting the right numbers. But if there's 3,000 of us, you got to know we've put some innocent men and women to death. You gotta acknowledge that just by sheer numbers, right? And where we've gotten it wrong. And we can't be okay as a society saying, well, maybe the majority of them deserve to be put to death. You know, maybe there was 1 or 2 or 3 or 100. You know, it's just, you know, the cost of doing business. There is no such thing when you think about human beings and human capital. There's no such thing of the cost of doing business for the life of another.
Yeah. Is it states' rights? The states choose? The
states choose putting people to death, but the feds also have their own sovereignty to put people to death. They can put you to death.
But doesn't the governor have a choice whether to...
In the states, for state crimes, the governor is the person who says...
Not federal crimes.
Not federal crimes. Yep, the different sovereignties. The states, again, the states are the teeth in this animal. And it shouldn't depend on which political wind is blowing to have a just outcome. Same thing I didn't mention in Terrence and Ferran's case. Look, we worked with the Attorney General office in that case early on. It was a guy by the name of Mark Herron. He was a Democrat. But I don't say that to say that he's a Democrat, so he's just giving people breaks. He took a whole year to go over everything that we had presented to him, and he wrote a 70-something page brief saying that Terrence Richardson and Ferran Claiborne were innocent and they should be granted their certificate of innocence, which would lead to their release from federal prison. He lost the election probably like 30 days after making this filing. A new administration came in by the name of Jason Miyares. This is a Republican administration that came in. Within 30 days, having not deeply read anything, they come in and they say, oh, what that guy did was wrong, and we're arguing that you should keep the guilty plea because they pled guilty. Don't think about the evidence and what this guy said. And do you know the court did just that? And that's the reason why we're still litigating this issue. We're hopeful now that President Biden will grant clemency, pardon to these guys. But the clock is ticking. And these guys were vouched for in terms of their innocence. So this ain't just Jarrett Adams and his story and his passion wanting you to believe it. This is an official who was the Attorney General, the highest lawyer in the state of Virginia, who wrote 70-plus pages going over all the evidence and saying not only that he believed that they were innocent, but he also said that there were documented police misconduct that was going on in the case. And they still sit in prison going on their 24th year, having been found not guilty of the crime in which their sentence was enhanced to life. And we need this clemency, this pardon to happen. We, in the community and the family of Terrence and Ferran, we've supported the Biden administration. We continue to support that administration. And they are just asking, I am asking on behalf of them that they be shown grace. Not getting into the political muddy waters of this side or who I'm voting for or who's going in office. I'm just begging on behalf of them that they show them some mercy and grace and give them their life back.
Are there significant differences between the two parties in the US and how they treat this, good and bad on both sides? Because I'm not aware of much, but I do remember Donald Trump at one point coming out and saying quite clearly there is required reforms within the prison.
Absolutely.
He understood the economics of it. He's a businessman. He said,
Yes.
we as a country are wasting taxpayers' money here.
Yes.
But is there a differences between the parties?
There's a difference between the party, but I'll just say this, again, without swimming in this muddy water as much, right? Whether it be the right or whether it be the left, the issues that plague our system seem to always take the back burner, and they are tended to last. I argue that if we tend to them first, we'll have a better society, a better culture, a better result. And we also keep generations from following suit going into the prison system. And I'll use this analogy to help, really reach folks. If we had a car company that on average, over 50% of the people, who purchase cars within 2 to 3 years, the cars are back on the production line because something is wrong with them. We would have a national debate on Congress. It'd be laws passed. We would put that car company out of business or require that they get it right. We have over 50% of people right now in prison where they've come back to prison. Why aren't we looking at the prison instead of continuing to punish the people who come in and out of prison?
Well, I think it's everything we said so far. It's somebody's making money from it.
That's it.
It could be subconscious racism. It could be elitism. There's probably a combination of reasons.
Absolutely. Intertwined.
But there's not enough incentive to do it because it requires good people to do hard things where they're not necessarily going to benefit themselves. Just
That's
hard
it.
things. But there's just this number of complex industrial complexes within the US, and they're all becoming more and more. I think it's being talked about more.
Yeah.
I think people are understanding that the big companies and the government are kind of fucking everyone.
Man, look, hey, here's what I'll tell you. If you don't believe that, then there's no way you don't believe that there's a solution that could be tied to money and businesses and stuff like that. I mean, could you imagine? Look, most of the time when people are committing crimes, they do it out of a sense of need of some form, right?
Yeah.
And Bill Gates, said this best, and I believe I'm quoting Bill Gates, that we're not going to lock our way up out of crime. We have to incentivize people, right? And you incentivize people by giving them jobs, work, something to strive towards, goals and stuff like that to hit. Again, when I go back to that war on drugs and the money that was used and the money that was placed in there, it resulted in the displacement and disenfranchisement of Black and brown communities because all of the fathers, uncles, and aunts were being locked up, right? We've seen the carnage that it's left. So why not take a fraction of that and have a war on revitalization of those communities? Why don't you do a war on childcare for single mothers so that way when they go to work and concentrate on work and school and better than their education, they don't have to worry about their kids coming susceptible to gun violence and being shot or joining gangs? Why don't we have a war on putting back infrastructures in a community? And why don't we have a damn war on getting the best of the best teachers in the worst of the worst school systems so that way we can have the best results from the kids that are growing up and who got next?
I mean, I agree with you. It all makes sense. Isn't this a historical race issue, though?
It is a historical race issue, but it's also a historical resource issue.
Yeah.
Right? Where again, we have to continue to try, is what we have to do. That faith thing, right?
Yeah.
But we also have to try new things. Like we don't have to continue to donate to the same, organizations or ideas. We can donate to new ones. We can get behind new ideas. And again, I'm telling you, I believe this research that we're doing is a new idea. And that's really what we have to do. We have, as a society, not only do we have a vote, but we can make choices with our money that can be impactful, right? So if business owners, if the elite, tackle an issue at a time, right? I believe we have a far greater chance at an impact.
Yeah, man. Okay, so what is the plan ahead?
Here's the plan. I would first say this. to get more insight on this idea, grab the book Redeeming Justice, right? And I will tell you, it's an audio book as well too. And grab the book because it's going to tell you about numbers, about the issues that we have, and also provide a solution in terms of what we believe we need to do. Follow us at lifeafterjustice.org. We are redoing our website to update the work that we've been doing, the research that we've been doing and going out to do. We've also been making progress with our mental health care program because it's not just a mental health care program. To be exact, our mental health care program is this. We are training mental health care providers on how to specifically provide therapy to people who've been wrongfully convicted. Because again, we suffer different things. There are women exonerees that we have who've been found guilty wrongfully of killing their child, right? That's a different type of impact. That's a different type of need. So we are specifically training therapists on that. And then again, we're going out with this survey. In order to go out with a survey, we need boots on the grounds. We need people in the courthouses and stuff like that to do that. So the future for us and for me and my continued steps of life after justice is getting this work done because I believe that the solutions that this work will produce will have a heartbeat even when mine stops.
All right. One last question. It's kind of a big question. But you've got this mission now that you're on, this life mission.
Mm-hmm.
And the work you're doing is obviously good and impacting people's lives. Almost certainly, if you hadn't been incarcerated, you wouldn't be on this.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look back, would you change things? I don't know if you've been asked that.
I've been asked something similar to that, and I'll just say this and tying it to a number. The price for admission was way more expensive than I would have been willing to pay to get to where I am right now in this seat. Because who knows? Maybe I could have been Mark Zuckerberg from the South Side of Chicago, right? Maybe I could have created, the Apple phone, right? Or maybe I just could have lived, raised a family, enjoyed my life. All of those things I deserved, right? So when I answer that question, I say this. I don't regret anything because the regret would be too heavy to carry. I live my life after justice being thankful.
Well, man, it's amazing. Incredible what you're doing.
Thank you.
And I wish you the best. If people want to help, if they want to support you, what should they do? Lifeafterjustice.org is supporting the mission, the data, the numbers. And again, look, I know a lot of times people don't give because they feel like, what is this $5 going to do? Donate that $5. And you're going to get a personalized response coming back from us, thanking you, keeping you on the email list of the things that we're doing. You'll probably get an email update of our victory with Terrence and Farron because we are claiming it, right? And keeping our faith on that. Buy the book, Redeeming Justice. And again, I tell you to buy the book because you probably know this. You don't get rich for selling books, right? That's not how it works, right? Yeah. I believe that it is a vessel and a tool to pass on an understanding, right? And it's almost like the behind the scenes of this podcast. So if people want the behind the scenes, buy the book Redeeming Justice. But go visit lifeafterjustice.org, buy a shirt to support. You could donate $5. Get on the emailing list so that way we can tell you what we're doing because we never know who's sitting at home watching football, the one that you kick, right? Not when we tackle, right? But watching football and say to themselves, man, I used to run this company. Who knows how to take data and convert it into numbers that make sense? Let me throw something across the pond and see if I can help these guys out. Look, we aren't refusing any help at all, even if that help and support is sharing a story and getting behind us as we march towards the end of this year in the administration, hoping that we get Terrence and Farron's freedom. Did Guy get you accepting Bitcoin? So I told Guy, I said, listen, Guy,
Bitcoin is like real above my pay grade. I need to understand it, right? I know the strength and the power, so I'm attracted to that, right? Being able to have that financial security and being able to be the decision maker and the wealth and how you share it and use it. But it's just like over my pay grade, so I need to have a session and I need to listen more to your podcast to find out more about it.
Well, do you know what needs to be done? Because there's this like phrase that people say that Bitcoin fixes this. So they look at things like war and they say the problem with the military-industrial complex is the government can print as much money as they want.
Yes.
And so you get these eternal wars. If you have a fixed money, like a hard money standard, you can't do that.
Yes.
And they've talked about that with the food industry. There's so many different things.
Yeah.
I just wonder how this relates to the prison industrial complex. It's something I'm going to go away and have a think about.
I mean, listen, I would love for us to continue to follow up this conversation.
Of course, man.
Because I really do believe, again, the answers, they start and stop with numbers, data, and I'm telling you, you just made a great point. If they can have an unlimited amount of money that they can spend on corrections in our system, it's been proven that throwing money at it ain't gonna fix it.
Yeah, man. All right, listen, let's stay in touch.
Please.
Hopefully we get you over to London at some point.
Absolutely.
We will send this out. We will try and get as many people aware as what you're doing and support you as best as we can. Great to meet you though, Jarrett.
Yep, you as well. Thank you for having me.